Hello, and welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Careers. My name is Claudia Malad, and on today's episode, we have Wes Worsfold, who's a lifelong entrepreneur, currently the CEO of Bit Bakery. In our conversation, we talk about what taking a university program with co-op taught him, his journey to entrepreneurship, and how his network helps influence his decisions. I hope you enjoy. So welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Careers. On today's episode, we have Wes Worsfold here with us today. So welcome, Wes.
Thank you. And you nailed the last name. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Good for you.
So can you just introduce yourself to us, Wes? Tell us about your career and a little bit about your journey.
Oh my gosh. Do you want the whole career or do you want like
a little condensed version? We'll get into details along the way.
Okay, the condensed version. I'm an entrepreneur.
Okay.
I co-founded and I'm CEO of a company called Bit Bakery Software. So Bit and bakery, like we make bits and bytes, but we bake them and make software, right?
Okay.
So ranging from mobile applications through to web applications for a whole bunch of different companies. I've been an entrepreneur most of my career. And so I've run 4 companies, all in technology of some sort. And before that, I worked for 5 years in coaching, mentoring, and funding entrepreneurs. So there's a theme throughout my career that deals with entrepreneurship, innovation, creativity, and even intrapreneurship or entrepreneurs within organizations.
That sounds great. What an impressive career.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning stages. Can you tell me a little bit about what you studied in school?
Yeah,
and
sure.
how you made this decision to do
so
this?
I'm a super proud alumni of University of Waterloo. I went to University of Waterloo solely because of co-op.
Okay.
I had no intentions of going to that school.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I realized, how am I going to pay for this?
Yeah.
Right? Because I had to pay my own way through school. And I'm like, okay, that summer job was okay, but it certainly didn't provide me with enough resources to keep going all the way. So Waterloo was the one that really introduced me to the work world outside of jobs I was doing just to survive. Mm-hmm. And I studied a joint degree in business and computer science. And so interestingly, when I went to University of Waterloo, I had no interest in either of those disciplines. I actually thought I was going to be a writer. I've published 2 books, but I was more interested in taking English studies and geography. And I thought one of those would end up being my major. And somehow I stumbled up being a business geek and computer geek because that was my true passion. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I love hearing stories about co-op and students. That's where I started my career, actually working in co-op at another college. So to hear that students are attracted to programs just for co-op makes me excited.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't say enough about it. When I graduated, I had 2 years work experience.
Yeah.
And I graduated in the middle of arguably the worst recession we've ever had in Canada. The unemployment rate for youth was like 24%.
Oh, yikes.
So it was like, oh my gosh, right? But I had such a competitive advantage against other students because I had this 2 years work experience. In fact, I was recruited by 2 to 3 organizations before I even graduated, which was unheard of for my friends that went to non-co-op education schools, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. And Waterloo's like the king of co-op. So that's what it is. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about your co-op experience? And was there anything that really stood out from that co-op experience?
Yeah. I mean, as I said, I just learned so much through co-op. I'm a very practical person. So sometimes the theory that we were learning, whether it was in more the computer science side of things or more on the business side of things, sometimes I had a low tolerance for. And so getting out on these co-op work terms just were like so important to me. One of the things I didn't mention to you that I essentially had this joint major, but I also had a minor in at the time, which was called Human Resource and Administrative Studies, right? And I had aspirations to solve what I perceived as a young person, this conflictual relationship between unions and management. Mm. And so I had applied for a co-op job and I was interviewed by the company that this job was for. And I must have said something during that interview whereby I got a call at home later that same day and said, I have good news for you and bad news for you. And I'm like, okay, well, the bad news is you didn't get the job.
Oh.
And by the way, employers are not supposed to do that in that system. There's a whole ranking system and bureaucracy you go through to have this match, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, like the phone call is like totally offside. Telling me I didn't get the job is totally offside. So I'm kind of like, whoa, this is really coloring outside the lines. What's going on? Then the person said, but we loved you and we loved what you talked about, particularly when it came to union and management and labor relations. I'm like, what? That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. She said, in fact, I've talked to head office and we are going to create another co-op position for you working in labor relations. And I'm like, amazing.
Absolutely.
So this is one of Canada's largest auto manufacturers. And I'm like, wow, okay. So I went to that co-op job starry-eyed and just so psyched about being able to work in this field that I was so passionate about. Because at that time, I was actually thinking that's what I would want to do long term.
Wow.
And what I learned from that experience is, heck no, that's not what I want to do. I became quickly disillusioned at the process, realized that probably I couldn't make that big a difference, even if I really, really tried, that there was very entrenched generational things and attitudes that, just probably weren't me to tackle. Other people might want to tackle that, but that just wasn't me. And it was one of the most defining moments in my career because it closed a door on something that I had an aspiration to do. So that was incredibly important for me. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people look at co-op, and I did mention it earlier, 2 years work experience. That's amazing. But what I wanted to expand upon is that, it was actually shutting two doors on two things that I was incredibly passionate about that allowed me to avoid getting locked into those careers that may have just led to the curse of the paycheck, so to speak, right? Where either role would have paid amazingly well, probably for the duration of my career as an employee, but just wasn't me, right? And so co-op wasn't only good for gaining experience, but also for determining what career path I did and did not want to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for sharing those stories.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So let's talk about your first job. So you were recruited before you even graduated. Where did you land in your first job after graduation?
First job after graduation. Let's keep the story neat because there's a whole bunch of ups and downs and bends in the road. But my first job out of graduating was actually with the Royal Bank. So I had an objective from a young age of wanting to be on Bay Street before I was 21, and I accomplished that. Amazing. So I worked in the Gold Towers downtown Toronto, and the role that I had was very unique. It was in the Ontario Public Relations Department, and I was responsible for publicizing a program that the Royal Bank was doing with the provincial government called the Student Venture Capital Program. And we actually loaned money, as crazy as it sounds, to students to start and run summer businesses. And so that's what I started out doing, was being the liaison between the bank and the government. And we had a third party in the partnership, which was the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and the local chambers of commerce across the province. And I was responsible for coordinating all of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you started really your career in entrepreneurship, supporting students with that. Yeah.
And I was maybe an outlier in that both my parents ran businesses.
Okay.
And a lot of my friends just turned out that they too ran businesses. Okay. Like their parents, and like I just kind of grew up in that. And so that was kind of my orientation. And I wasn't so interested in jobs as I was like pursuing entrepreneurship and my interest in that. And so I came by it honestly. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about what happened after you left the Royal Bank?
Yeah. So, I mean, I loved working for the Royal Bank and I intended to stay there. I actually had a really clearly articulated career path within that organization. And it was a very flattering career path. And I was like, wow, okay, this could be amazing. And then what happened is we were at a social event with our partners at the province of Ontario and the Chambers of Commerce. And I started to talk to the representatives from the province right in front of the vice president of public relations for the bank that I reported directly to. And essentially they started to recruit me.
Wow.
Started to say, hey, we love Wes and we'd love to have him help us expand from both a policy and program perspective what we're doing for youth employment and youth entrepreneurship. Surprisingly to me, and maybe despite the career plan that was all articulated, the Royal Bank was really supportive of that actually and said, hey, yeah, like we love our partnership in this program, which was called Student Venture Capital at the time. But if we want to grow and expand that, and if Wes can be, the person that does that, we fully support it. I'm like, okay, because as important as my career path was at the bank, I talked earlier about being a little disillusioned with Bay Street, and I was much more passionate about entrepreneurship.
Right.
So it turned out this opportunity was with a branch of the Premier's office at the time. So that was a really unique opportunity because I could influence policy directly to the Premier and to the Minister of Finance, and was able to create a number of venture programs for young entrepreneurs beyond just students. And I got to conceive the program. I got to develop it. I got to implement it. I even remember writing the code for the loan portfolio management for being able to do that. And so that was just really great because I was building something brand new right from scratch. And it was exciting. And it was exciting to see the businesses getting funded and to see those grow. So how did you then shift from that amazing opportunity to then becoming an entrepreneur and opening your own business? Yeah. So there was a step in between where, for personal reasons, because I was in Toronto at that time, I decided to move back to Waterloo Region. And I decided to do that totally because of personal reasons, left my job, which I loved, but for personal reasons, I wanted to move back here. And so I just came here. And
okay.
How to figure out what I'm going to do.
What are you going to do?
Right?
Yeah.
And it was actually through a telephone conversation with my dad. He goes, I just saw this job posting for this role with this organization that helps people start businesses. And I was like, oh, and I got it, read it, and it was right up my alley and I applied for it. So then at the end of the day, I ended up spending 5 years with this organization. It was very small and grassroots when I joined it. But kind of being an entrepreneur, I grew it to 55 employees, expanded it throughout the region, and really developed their self-employment and entrepreneurship training programs. I built a community loan fund with community partners like credit unions and private donors to be able to lend people money to start businesses and all the rest of it. So I really was doing very much what I did on a provincial level, but at a local level in Waterloo Region and also Guelph.
Okay.
And so that was fantastic. And I really loved it. And it was really good for my career experience because now co-op, I'd had private sector work experience. And then I had public sector work experience with the Premier's office. And then I got the not-for-profit charitable experience as well. So that was really cool. And, I did all that by like early 30s type thing, right?
That's amazing.
So it was quite young and it had that amount of varied experience, which was awesome.
Great exposure in all the various sectors. So that's awesome. So how did we venture into entrepreneurship?
Okay. So I was, I always felt like, this 5-year cycle was a thing. Like I was probably just running out of steam. Some people would say boredom after 5 years. And I began to look at the grass is greener type opportunities. And I'm like, geez, Wes, you've spent your entire career helping other people do this. You should really be doing this for yourself, right? And so that nugget kept growing in my brain. And I happened to get an invite to a workshop that was happening in Hamilton. And it was a talk by a guy named Jim Carroll, who published a book at the time that was called The Canadian Internet Handbook. And I'd been using the internet at that time, but it was not the internet that we know today. It was the first generation of the internet. It was text on screens, and that text was green and it was underlined sometimes. That's what we now call a hyperlink. And we would click on it and we would go to other information. It was primarily a domain of researchers, universities, and things like that. So I was researching entrepreneurship and whatnot. I thought I would go to this tiny little talk in Hamilton. I showed up. It was a lecture hall that had a seating capacity of 800. Every seat was full.
Wow.
Right? And I'm beginning to pick up on these signals. I'm like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
I'd read the book, but I had never actually seen the graphical internet.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a time where the internet was not what it is today. It was the text. But I saw the full internet, the first version of the Mosaic Netscape browser, and my jaw just dropped. And on the drive from Hamilton back to Waterloo, I made the decision that that's my future. I don't know quite what I'm going to do with it yet, but I was inspired by what I saw. The 800 people. What's this interest? That's crazy. Then I saw what was capable in a fully graphical interface that was engaging or could be engaging for people. And so that was the genesis of my first company. And it was just me. And I just resigned my job and then figured, okay, you got to get started at this. And I decided to I thought, because of all my experience coaching, training, and entrepreneurs, I thought, I can use the internet to do that.
Yeah.
And so this was at an age when like people hadn't thought of the internet for education courses and all the rest of it. And I started building.
Wow.
And so I built something that is called the Enterprising Edge, which was the world's first online training program for entrepreneurs. I had the curriculum approved by the province. I was able to license it to organizations across Canada. I began to expand in the e-learning space by starting to work with colleges and universities who were starting to think about doing that as well. Did a lot of work for Conestoga College early in the day. And then I also started working in the knowledge management area for finance and financial organizations as well. But the genesis for that idea was just noodling in my head that I should do this for myself in terms of being an entrepreneur. And then just having this one experience that just changed my mind. That was the lightning rod or the aha experience or the light bulb going off. Even though I didn't really know until some days, weeks, months later that I would land on just applying what I'd previously been doing, but to the internet world.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So thank goodness you went to that workshop.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I was already interested because I was an early adopter of, phase one of the internet. Obviously, I bought the book and read it and those things. So there was an interest there, even though it wasn't core to what I was doing. But it was the signal that I saw at that one moment. Yeah. It was just, it feels in my brain, it feels as real as it just happened last week, right?
Wow.
Which I know that's one of those, like, I don't know if everybody's had those life-changing experiences, but that was it. Like for me, that was it. And that set me on the path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that story. Awesome. How did you even come up with this idea for your business, the current business you operate now?
Yeah. So I didn't come up with it. My customers did.
Okay.
When we formed Bit Bakery, we were fully dedicated to building a product. We didn't know what it would be. Right. So a lot of people think you need to know exactly what you're going to do. I'm going to be a little contrarian, depending upon your point of view, and say, really, business starts by just doing something. If you start doing something and start experimenting, start hacking, start prototyping, you're going to find out what you want to do. So we had full confidence that we would build whatever the next big, and it wasn't just an idea. We actually had a segment. We said, we're going to be in this consumer market because together as a team, we had some big home runs in the consumer mobile app space.
Okay.
And we're really proud of that. And
of course,
pretty, confident, right? Well, we kept doing these ideation sessions and customer discovery sessions and all the rest of it. And while all that was going on, people kept coming to us saying, hey, you guys are awesome. Could you build this for us? Hey, you guys, could you build this for us? Could you build this for? And we're still building stuff for other people.
Wow.
So yeah. And we're happy doing that because I think all of us love learning about other companies, learning about their challenges and their problems, and then being able to solve their problems through, software. So yeah. And we just keep doing it. And so far, we're still kind of starry-eyed about that product idea, but we've not got there.
That's so funny. That's awesome though. And what would you say the biggest difference is between being an employee and being an entrepreneur? What is the biggest difference there?
Well, it's been so long since I've been an employee. I'm not sure that I can speak from the employee's point of view. So I'll speak from my point of view as an entrepreneur.
Okay.
I think one of the largest differences is as an entrepreneur, you're on all the time.
Right.
Your evenings before official work hours, weekends, holidays, etc. You're always having this subroutine in your brain percolating in the background, even if it's not in the forefront, thinking about the business, jotting down concepts, ideas, etc., those types of things. Where I think as an employee, for the most part, hopefully you're able to have a start and finish to your day, maybe have a better work-life balance that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So I think to me, that's the biggest difference. I think the other difference is what I call the curse of the paycheck.
Okay.
Right. So let me explain that. I think an employee falls victim to the curse of the paycheck. There's an assumption that, if you're paid every 2 weeks, that money is just going to show up every month. It's just going to show up. And in today's fast-paced innovation knowledge economy, that might not be the case. And so I think what entrepreneurs know is that you can't be complacent because that paycheck might always not be there.
Yeah.
And so you need to keep innovating and thriving. Whereas, the curse of the paycheck can affect you in that it's just like, well, it's always going to be there. And it can lead to complacency.
It's a safety net, really.
Yeah,
the paycheck coming every 2 weeks, you know exactly what to expect. Whereas when you're an entrepreneur, you don't know if that's going to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the story that I told earlier where, I'm not able to meet payroll, like none of the employees knew that. Like they did get paid and they've always gotten paid. I've never missed a payroll. It's just super important to me. But, that's for me to deal with, not them, because they've got rent to pay. They've got mortgages to pay, car loans or whatever else, families to feed, responsibilities, whatever it might be, interests that they want to pursue, travel, whatever it is. And they depend on that paycheck coming in, right? That safety net. But as an entrepreneur, I feel like there's a lot of responsibility to provide that, right? Because that's really what I'm there to do.
Right. That's awesome. What would you say is something that you're most proud of over your career journey?
That's a great question. I think the thing I'm proudest of is the things I've created. So I need to explain that because it's just like, okay, what
does that mean?
Does that mean the software? Does that mean it's this application that had, 12 million daily active users? Like, ooh, that's great.
Yeah.
I should be proud of that. And I am, but it's really the creation aspect of things, right? So all of the companies that I started and also a lot of the companies that, I was involved in funding or mentoring the entrepreneurs, they started from scratch, right? With nothing but an idea. And it's really rewarding to be able to create something from nothing, essentially, from an idea, which people could argue literally has no value until you add value to that idea, right? So at the end of the day, I've always viewed my businesses, the products that we create as my art, as strange as that sounds.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, entrepreneurship is a blend of skill and art, right? And I tend to align more with the artist side of things, like being creative and employing creativity, not in just what you create in terms of the business and the products, but also the operations and how you do things. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And I could talk about awards and other things, but actually they kind of diminish compared to, the joy that I've personally derived from that creation process.
Right.
Yeah.
And you did mention that you've, started 4 businesses is what you said.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about maybe some of the challenges along the way and what were those businesses?
Yeah. I mean, running a business is just absolutely full of challenges, right? So, I mean, I remember the 2 a.m.s, the 3 a.m.s, not knowing how I was going to meet a client deadline the next day. At 10 a.m. when we needed to present to the executives that were on the group or, those types of things. I remember those early morning hours where I'm scratching my head, not knowing how I'm going to make a payroll of 40 people.
Wow.
And like literally like staring into the abyss and just having no solutions. There's been times at which, you know, the peak and valleys of entrepreneurship, the valleys have been very deep. Peaks have been very high as well. But, you know, I think it's just managing those peaks and valleys, those ups and downs. Yeah, I think those are some of the biggest challenges. There's been technical challenges because we're a technical company. There's people challenges because we deal with people within our organization and then also on the customer side. But it's really those most difficult moments when, if an entrepreneur or business owner is being candid, I think most, including myself, will admit there's many times you feel like throwing in the towel. And so that's what sticks out in my mind the most as being the most difficult thing, is when you feel like you've got nothing left. The tank is empty. You don't know if you can keep going forward. And somehow you need to find the resilience and the wherewithal to be able to like pick yourself up and be able to keep going. Yeah.
Okay. And what would you say would be a pivotal moment in your very impressive career? What was the moment you knew that this is it?
You know, I think what's interesting is not something I'd love to talk about, but it came right into my mind. So I'm just going to be candid about it. For my second company, at the end of the day, I ended up raising a whole bunch of money for it. Never anticipated doing that. But raising that first round of money, wow, what a rush. That was quite a feeling. Yeah. I had no idea what I was getting involved in, quite honestly, at the time. But having the faith of investors, you know, being able to take those checks to the bank and realize, wow, all these other people believe in this. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a really big high. Yeah.
Yeah. And work-life balance must come up, of course, if you're an entrepreneur. How does that work for you? Work-life balance.
So I'm not sure if life-work balance is an objective that entrepreneurs have. So I should explain that more fully. I think when people say life-work balance, they presume that it's kind of a 50-50 endeavor. Running a business and being an entrepreneur means that the business and your passion for entrepreneurship needs to be one of your most important primary relationships. So when it comes to work-life balance, my balance would be not in equilibrium compared to some other people. Okay. I definitely over-index on wanting to do things for the business, wanting to accomplish what I want to do with the business. And sometimes that sacrifices personal time or, you know, personal activities and all those types of things. So I think if we look at life-work balance as a continuum and that it varies for everybody, then I achieve that. But it means often not going at a level pace. It means sometimes going at a sprint and then taking a break and then sometimes resurfacing again so that you can go at it really hard for longer hours, many days of the week, and then keep going.
No, I like that. And you have to do what works for you, right?
Exactly. You've got to find that rhythm, right? Where you're best suited to excel. Yeah,
absolutely. So you mentioned you've been an entrepreneur for most of your career. Can you talk about how the role of an entrepreneur has changed from, you know, operating your first business to the business you're operating now?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things is that I've seen myself go as kind of the expert of everything, and then supplementing that with hiring people full-time, part-time, contractors to supplement the areas I don't know, to grow that even further, to building a team so that, you know, I haven't written code for quite a while. 3 years ago was just for fun. I just, you know, created a project and decided to do it just to test myself a little bit. Right. Whereas in my first business, I would do sales calls, business development, go to meetings during the day. I would deal with household stuff and family and put the kids to bed and all that type of stuff. Then I'd do a second shift to as long as I could work to the early morning, you know, wee hours of the morning, coding to build the stuff that I spent during the day talking about.
Right.
So now I have people doing that. So that changes my role significantly. So I think my primary role today internally in the company is one of coach. And, you could say it's leader, but there's more to it than that, right? It's actually identifying where people's strengths are and nurturing those and growing them and helping them to recognize weaknesses. Sometimes we just, okay, that's a weakness and that's core to you and it's likely not going to change. And so that's fine. We just accept that and build off of that. But it's all around like the human side, the human capital side, but it's really coaching, right? Helping people to grow, helping people to be able to do more than when they just came to the company.
Right.
There are still those roles that just need to get done, right? The buck stops with me. So, I've got bottom line, profit and loss statement, accountability. I report to the board, right? I have a board, even though like I am on the board.
Yeah.
And I'm the chair of the board, but I still have a board and I still report to them. Like I have a boss. It's not, I just can't decide all those things. Those are mandatory things to have in place. I definitely am still the lead for business development, sales and whatnot. But the part that I really enjoy now is the coaching and mentoring and bringing people along. It's one of the reasons why we continue to hire co-ops as well today, because that allows other members of my team to develop those skills in themselves as well.
Yeah.
And so I think now the biggest difference is this coaching, mentoring and leadership role that I have. Yeah.
Because essentially you started from being a one-man operation to now having a team. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, I was a one-person band. Okay. Yeah, I was a solo act for a while. Yeah.
So switching gears a little bit, let's chat a little bit about networking. So how important is networking for an entrepreneur?
Okay, here's a secret. In one of my office drawers in my home office, I have every business card I've ever collected.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know how I stumbled upon that as an early person in my career, but I just somehow knew that every person I met was incredibly important. And so back in the day when people had business cards and you collected business cards and people offered a business card, I've been doing that since the beginning. Shortly after I graduated, I was part of an alumni group. It was called Executive Alumni Group from University of Waterloo. And it was all about networking and meeting other graduates from the university and building those relationships. Networking has been incredibly important for my business. I love LinkedIn. I post usually multiple times a day. I have a large number of connections, almost all of whom I've worked with or met. It's absolutely critical. I can't say how important it is. Current day, I'll tell you the reason for me it's so important is that we don't do any marketing as a company other than our social presence. Okay. Which is just bizarre. Everything is inbound because of my network, primarily my network, but the team's network, right? And so I've built these trust relationships over the years through networking, and that's what drives the business in our company, right? Used to call it word of mouth, and it is that too, but it's really through networking and maintaining those relationships. Okay. Yeah, I can't stress the importance of that enough. Yeah.
And how would you advise a student, say a student wanted to become an entrepreneur and they want to start networking? What advice would you give to a student like that?
Okay. First piece of advice, talk to other people in your class, right? So if you're in a class of 30 people and you just say, okay, I'm not going to do public math here, but let's say that each one of those people know a couple of hundred people. Yeah. You're connected to those people. If you're sitting in a classroom with them for 4 months or, many years, if it's a multi-year program, get to know all those people, because through that relationship, you've already leveraged hundreds of relationships potentially because you're one degree separated from that. The next thing is talk to your professors. Professors, are often involved in some really interesting things. And so step one, start with that, right? And then filter out into the community. And you might say, well, what does that mean? Like, how do I filter out in the community? Whatever you're passionate and interested in, get involved in it. Get involved in clubs, look on Meetup, look for meetups that are happening that are related to your interest, and, look for volunteer opportunities, right? It's so important to like give back, and, through volunteering, people get to know you outside of the student role or outside of your work role, and all sorts of relationships can evolve and grow from that.
Absolutely. All great tips and suggestions to build a network for a student who maybe has no idea where to get started.
Yep.
So you said you're in the tech business. Can you tell me a little bit about how artificial intelligence has had an impact on your business in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I think that's a question we ask ourselves every day, right? So I started using early versions of what people now know as ChatGPT back in 2018.
Oh, wow.
2 years after OpenAI was formed. And again, through networks and relationships, I was able to get early access to those things. And so it started me thinking right away, what am I going to do with this, right? So currently, we have built AI applications for our customers. Because it's so new, we're having to find ourselves in a unique role of actually proposing uses and solutions to our customers of how they might be able to use AI. So one of our implementations is a chat bot that works off of large language models and generative AI to be able to comb through hundreds, if not thousands, of legalese type pages and provide plain language English answers to people that are wanting to query all the information that's in those forms. We also built, just as proof of concept in our labs division, our own product called Ghostwriter Pro AI that helps people to write better using AI and just simplifying and removing the necessity to write a prompt into an LLM. So you just, in our app, just tell what you want to write about, and then you can use sliders, just moving them back and forth to define things like tone, the formality, all these types of things, so that you can tune it to, write a blog post. You can tune it to write a LinkedIn post or an X, if that's the current verb, instead of a tweet. I don't know, but tweet or X, yeah. So, we can use it for all sorts of purposes. Yeah.
Okay. I love that. That's awesome. And for your company, because you're a tech company, what are the future goals for your organization?
Yeah. So right now, I think you introduced what's new, which is, how are we going to expand more in using AI? And I say that from two perspectives. One is in the operations of our own company. So we spent 2 hours yesterday just jamming as a group, sharing what we had learned even in the last 2 months. And we all had a bunch of like aha experiences. It was like, you can do that? That's crazy. And so just continuing to learn how we can use it in the organization. We're obviously using it a lot when it comes to coding. Because it's a great tool to help, increase our productivity for software development. And then the next thing is responding to our customers' needs and interest, and sometimes being the proponent to offer suggestions about how they're going to use AI. So I think we're going to see a lot of change in the company over the next 5 or 10 years as we all learn how AI is changing the world.
What advice would you have for students? So I'm a new grad coming out of school. What advice would you have for a student that's graduating?
Yeah. So I think you touched upon one of the most important things which is networking. Because I know school is very demanding, right? And so often it's easy to segment it to say, okay, I'm in school now and that's what I do. And maybe there's a part-time job and maybe there's outside school activities and extracurriculars and things like that. That's awesome. And all the rest of it. But I think one of the first things they should do is start networking and getting internships or co-ops if they can arrange it, even if they're not in that type of education. Because when they graduate, they should be relying on the networking that they've done, the relationships that they've built to begin to find those jobs. And if they've been able to experiment in what they're interested in through internships, co-ops, volunteering, etc., that's going to help them to be able to refine to find that job. What often happens, I think, is people have a start and stop type mentality when it comes to finishing school. I'm in school, now I finish, therefore I search for work.
Right.
No.
Doesn't always work like that.
No, I think that should be like an all-time, full-time activity, right?
Yeah.
And if you're not actually applying for jobs, and we can talk about why applying for jobs is not a good idea if you'd like, but really, it's that so-called hidden job market, right? And that applies more today than ever before. Well, how do you access that? Well, it's through your networks and connections, right? It's not through looking at Indeed or Monster or any other of these job boards. My point of view. So we can take it with a grain of salt, but that's been my experience. And actually, as a person that hires, that's also how I hire. It's rare that I'll hire like what I would say cold, someone I've never met before. It's either based on a recommendation from someone else that I know, or they've gotten to know me somehow, some way, even if it's just a LinkedIn connection and we've happened to chat on that or something like that. Yeah.
You're echoing everything that I say in my class. So that's awesome.
Oh, that's great.
That is awesome.
Good.
We talk about the hidden job market. We talk about why, applications are important, but don't put all your eggs in that basket, because networking is huge and it is really opening so many opportunities for people.
And, the other thing I'd like to add to it is I would like students to think about how they stand out. And so I think it means that they should be considered, like they need to consider themselves as a brand, right? Like, who are you? Think of You Inc., INC, like You Incorporated. Who are you?
Yeah.
And I know that's hard. That's a really hard question to answer, right? And so I know when people, put fingers to keyboards and begin to create a resume, it's hard for people to do, right? It's even harder to create a brand and figure out who you are. But if you can figure out your brand and be authentic and lean into that, that's going to make you stand out from other people. Like, don't try to be more similar to other people. Try to embrace who you are, get to know yourself, and just lean into it.
Well, it's easy and it's natural because you're being yourself as opposed to trying to be someone else.
Yeah, you just suffer from imposter syndrome forever.
Yeah.
And it'll just not be a happy experience.
Yeah, definitely. So what gives you hope for the future? We live in a very fast-paced, ever-changing world, and you work in the world of tech that's changing faster than ever. So what gives you hope for the future? Innovation and creativity.
I mean, that's what separates mankind from, other mammals and whatnot, is we are, if nothing else, probably, our biggest attribute is our brains and our creativity, problem solving, et cetera. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm passionate about entrepreneurship and innovation, is that I think innovation will be the key that unlocks many of the solutions to the problems that we have. And so that's what gives me a lot of optimism. I think the fact that we now have all-time, anytime access to knowledge and learning also gives me a huge amount of optimism, because there was a time at which accessing learning was difficult.
Yeah.
It involved money. It often involved travel. It involved focusing around time and place and hours. Now we've all got these devices that are in our pockets, bags, belted onto our hips, whatever it might be, that, are really supercomputers from what used to be 10 supercomputers 10, 15 years ago, but now they're in handheld devices, right? So we have access to that information anywhere, anytime. So learning becomes lifelong. The ability to have a growth mindset and, always be acquiring knowledge for any individual exists. And if we leverage that as a humanity, it's endless possibilities.
Yeah, sky's
right?
the limit.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for coming in today, Wes. It was great to see you and to hear about your career journey. I wish you all the best in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
What an inspiring conversation. Thank you for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Careers. If you like this episode and want to hear more, follow us on Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube. See you in the next one.